Welcome, everyone. My name is Peter Young, and I'm going to be the moderator for this webcast. I'm very, very pleased that we have the two panelists that we have, two different careers, but very interesting perspectives on biotech. Before we get started, though, I just want to say briefly that this program started in 2012 when a group of us Yale alumni who were recruiting at Yale came to the conclusion that as smart as Yale students were, that they were not getting very good information about different careers, or at least accurate information. And a lot of people, they're going to law school, not really understanding what it's really like to be a lawyer. And then after 3 years of law school, 2 years at Skadden Arps or something, realized it really wasn't a good fit. But sadly, for reasons that maybe they could have figured out before they went to law school. So we started this program, which is part of Yale. This is a Yale sanctioned program. In fact, you can find us through their website, both the Alumni Association and the Office of Career Strategies. And its sole purpose is to try to help students get candid information, positive and negative, about different professions to help them make better decisions about what careers they ought to follow. There is a website called yalecareerpanels.com. If you go to that, it will list all of the, I don't know, 65, 75 of these that we've done. There also are links to the recordings of all except the first three, because of the first three we didn't record. And so you can watch, one on drama and film or on music or whatever it is. We thought we'd run out of professions, but it turns out there's just an enormous number of professions. So, and then there's some that we repeat because obviously things like investment banking or law or medical are ones where you ought to do it every couple of years because they're popular professions for Yaleys. The only other thing I would say is this. This webcast, I hope, will be very, very helpful to you. But the one thing it won't do is it won't help you do a self-assessment to really figure out whether you match with a profession. And we strongly encourage all of you is to really ask yourself a lot of questions about and try to be honest with yourself and get someone who knows you and is willing to be honest, who can tell you, oh, no, you say you like working in teams, but you just aren't that way. Get some help to really understand yourself, not only about skills, but also preferences. Is money important? Do you like to work outdoors? Whatever it is. And do that before you really think about careers, because otherwise you could have a mismatch, and not because you weren't intellectually able to do the job, but maybe it just doesn't fit your natural lifestyle and just didn't realize it, right? But the one thing's for sure is no one is objective about themselves. No one, right? And I know Peikwen, is honest about, the kryptonite being his sole weakness and things like that. But, you really need to be pretty honest about yourself, because that's the best way to get to the right place. So that's basically it. We're going to make sure we leave about 10 minutes at the end for questions. The way you ask questions is just type them into the Q&A chat box. The panelist and I will be able to see your questions, and we'll take as many as we can at the end. But I want to start out. This is a very interesting date by which we're having this panel. It is a day that Robert Kennedy Jr. was approved by the Senate to be the overall head of healthcare. And I mention this because, biotech has gone through ups and downs, but we're about to head into a period, at least in the US anyway, where there'll be a lot of uncertainties. It doesn't mean that good things won't happen. It just means there are more things that are uncertain today than maybe a couple of months ago. And our philosophy here is go in with your eyes open, because that's the most important thing. The last thing is this profession, like all others, it's very hard to say what jobs are there, because within biotech, there are research jobs, there are regulatory jobs, there are marketing jobs, there are all sorts. And then biotech is covered by professions outside of the industry. they're people doing research at universities, but also they're people who are equity research analysts at investment banks covering biotech, or investment or venture capitalists investing in biotech companies. So it's impossible for us to cover all of those, but we're very fortunate that our panelists have done a lot of those different things. Linda has been not only a leader in biotech companies, but she's been a doctor. She's done research. She's also been an investor at Interwest. And Peikwen also has a lot of different angles to it. So we'll try to cover what we can, but just recognize it won't be possible to cover all the different types of ways that you could be involved with biotech. So let me do this. I'm going to start out with the first question, which is, when you think about biotech, where is the profession, the industry heading? Good or bad? But I also want each of the panelists first just quickly summarize, what do you currently do today? And we'll forgive the fact that some of you went to Stanford, that you're forgiven for that. But Linda, do you want to start out?
Sure. Thank you, Peter. It's great to be speaking to a bunch of Yale students, and it reminds me that my favorite class as a Yale student, Yale undergrad, was a college seminar called Ways of Knowing, which basically took somebody from the law school, somebody from the medical school, somebody from philosophy, somebody from, I think, architecture, and then there was one other field. And we had like a little module with each one. And I really felt like it really kind of helped me think through just exactly what Peter is saying, that, how do these different professions approach their jobs? How do they think about what they do? What sort of intellectual challenge is it? So I don't know if that class is still given at Yale, but Peter, I think it's great that you're doing these panels. So my career has been varied, as Peter said. I've been both on the medical side. I started out in medicine. I went to Yale Med School, trained at UCSF, practiced medicine for a number of years, and then pivoted into the biotech industry. And I've basically been in the biotech world ever since, from a number of different angles, both starting companies, investing in companies, and I'm now currently serving on boards of a number of biotech companies. I also teach a class at Stanford Business School called Startup Garage, which teaches students how to start companies, and I zero in on the healthcare-oriented companies. So those are my main activities at this point, Peter.
Yeah, great. Peikwen, would you like to comment about what you do, the easy job that you have as CEO of Yiviva?
Well, first of all, wonderful to meet everyone, and it's an honor to be adopted into the Yale family. I grew up in New Haven. Both my parents were scientists, so spent a lot of time at the med school, but then ended up going to the Yale of the West. As Linda spent some time out there as well, but I ended up boomeranging back for multiple reasons. And actually, really, I think healthcare is one of these industries that affects everyone. And in my particular case, cancer was something that affected my family. And so my aunt had late stage cancer. Doctor told her to take care of her things. And she ended up taking a cancer drug that my father had discovered and was developing. So my father is a pharmacologist at Yale, Cheng, and on Susie, who was my closest family when I was in college in California, she had this miraculous turnaround, ended up living cancer-free for 17 years, watching all of these grandchildren grow up, and I was amazed. I was like, how can we help more people? How can I help? I was living in Asia at the time. My career had has taken many different routes, and in really in a circuitous way ended up into healthcare. So having grown up in a family of scientists, at one point thought about being a doctor, was admitted to medical school, trained as an EMT, did ambulance runs, but never went to medical school, and ended up going in actually study product design initially, and was involved in, at least on the healthcare side, helping launch communication networks for healthcare in Uganda, and then was involved in some other stuff, and got involved in building businesses in Silicon Valley and Asia, and it was through this experience of my aunt and wanting to help that I said, I don't know anything about biotech, but I hopefully maybe, can help in other ways, and just jump in. And so we have spun out our company. It's called Yiviva, E meaning medicine, Chinese, Viva, long live in Spanish. And we are developing actually a botanical drug, first described 1800 years ago, never known to treat cancer, but now we've sort of modernized it, and now in the process of taking it through clinical trials. So, where is the profession heading? I'd really just probably say disease knows no borders. Innovation can come from anywhere. And really, we're at a really exciting time, because there's a great understanding of biology. We have all this technology, new modalities, and this integration. And as Linda pointed out, the interdisciplinary aspect of it is hugely important. And so by fusing these, then we can really advance the science. And I think in New Haven, it's a really interesting time too. Probably for those that are on campus, I don't know how many people are, sort of alums joining on the call, but if you're on campus, you probably see all these buildings going up. And so I think there's a critical mass building in New Haven. There's more and more companies coming out. And so I think there's, it's an exciting time, but not without its, shall we say, certain uncertainties out there.
I want to comment on history, and that is biotech is actually a relatively new industry. And actually, if you go way back just 100 years, all the drugs were developed by chemical companies. Literally every, DuPont was a drug company, Dow, so forth. And the reason why was that the chemistry for making drugs was a chemical product, right? And only at a certain point, it became the technology shifted, so for fermentation and biotech methods, so forth, that eventually the technologies for developing drugs began to shift away from the strengths of these big chemical companies. And eventually, so there was kind of a separation. Then there was a separation between the big pharma and individual biotech companies, because for a lot of reasons, smaller startups became more successful, more nimble, better at inventing things, and so forth. And so although big pharma was still inventing drugs, there was this whole flurry of new companies that were developing drugs and raising money. So it's a real evolution. And I remember, when I was at J.H. Whitney, the oldest venture capital firm, actually, John Hay Whitney, they made the first investment in biotech of the Genetics Institute. And remember, the Benno Schmidt, the senior partner, said, well, this is the first time I've invested in a company that I have no idea how they're going to make money, right? I just know I think they're going to invent something, but I don't know how. And that is an important point about biotech, because biotech only gradually over time have become, rather than just R&D engines, have become companies that have revenues and so forth. And so the history is very important, because it's also evolving, and it will continue to evolve with regard to the relationship of biotech to big pharma, but also the technologies that are being invented are going to change things, as well. So is the future bright for biotech, Linda? Is it dim? It depends upon what area you're talking about? What's your opinion, Linda?
Sure. I think it's very bright with an asterisk. The science just keeps getting more and more exciting. people like Peikwen's parents and, have been teaching, and a whole new generation, and their work is exploding. The whole area, there's this whole area now of synthetic biology, and AI is now touching every aspect of biotechnology. A lot of people are hopeful that it will help speed up the process of drug discovery. That, has not yet happened, but over the next 10, 20 years, I think it will happen. So scientifically, it's just an incredibly exciting time. And I would love to be graduating from Yale today and starting out my career, because it's just going to be such an exciting time. The asterisk is what you referred to, Peter, the fact that somebody who is a vaccine denier could be elected or, confirmed as head of Health and Human Services. I hope that he will listen to reason, that he, is saying he's not going to take people's vaccines away. But we are facing a real, for some people, especially in academic science, a real crisis with this NIH freeze on the indirect funding. I'm involved in a lot of academic research institutes, and just as an advisor, and they are just devastated by this idea, that they're going to be losing hundreds of millions of dollars. And it's going to have a huge impact on the ability to do their research. So, of course, there are lawsuits, and we'll have to see how it all pans out in the courts. But it's just a really unsettling time, that, politics has reared its head in the pursuit of something that really advances society and does good things for people. So that's, my yin and yang about science. I still would encourage anybody who loves science to go into biotech, because I do think these challenges will work their ways out, but you have to go in with your eyes open.
Yeah, no, I think that's right, and but there's a premium on choosing wisely, right, and doing your homework, because there are going to be winners and losers, even in a difficult environment. And it's very careful. I mean, you can only have one job, or at least as far as I think, no. And so you want to do your homework and choose wisely, because, do your homework on whether the companies that you might think of have the right technologies, the right patents, the right, management teams and so forth, because those can be really critical. Peikwen, your comment on that question?
Yeah, I mean, being a eternal optimist, I mean, I feel like I think there is a lot of uncertainty, and there's no crystal ball on all of this. But I think sometimes when you sort of navigate multiple valleys of death, you focus on what you can control. And in the case of, I think. In the case of a biotech, you better, focus on generating quality data, so that you can, ride out, some of the macro turbulence that is, sort of beyond us, and that hopefully, sort of calmer minds, prevail. And so I think that, it is a exciting opportunity right now. If anything, the world needs people advancing healthcare. Healthcare is really quite broad in that regard, right? And I think, we'll have differing points of view come out with the new administration. There's been a focus on, developing therapeutics or devices, later stage treatments. How about prevention? Treating, the food as medicine. I mean, I think functional foods, functional drinks. There's a lot of opportunity for us to really advance how we think of ourselves, treating the person holistically, because we all are a system, a society as a system, because these are all interconnected, and even some of the geopolitical things between country to country. I mean, our business navigates between U.S. and, say, Greater China, and there's a lot of sort of macro things that are happening right now. But if there's areas, for people to work together on, it should be healthcare, climate, et cetera.
Yeah.
So I'm hopeful, yeah.
Yeah. By the way, I run an investment bank that focuses on chemicals and life sciences. So although I am the moderator, because I've spent my whole career fixing healthcare and chemical companies at Bain, and then as a venture capitalist at J.H. Whitney, and then in investment banking, I will comment on the investment banking side. So I can comment on careers if you're on the investment banking side, or observing companies that we help fund or help buy companies, so forth. The next question is, so how do you get into the profession? It's a little bit complicated question. It depends upon get into what, right? Is part of the issue. And what's a typical career path? Maybe I'll just start on the investment banking side and just say, people who work in investment banking in healthcare and in biotech and pharma, it is an industry that is very complicated. You have to have a lot of technical expertise. You have to know science, and you have to know regulatory things. So you can't just say, oh, gee, I got an English major and I want to be an analyst in healthcare, group at JP Morgan or in biotech. So there's a certain minimum knowledge that you have to have. So if you're thinking about investment banking, and you're thinking about healthcare, particularly biotech or pharma, very important for you to say, okay, then I got to make sure that I have those science or research credentials. And once you get in, you'll learn the financial part, right? But you can't learn science on the job at an investment bank. It doesn't work. So I would say that, and a lot of people go into investment banking laterally from something else. Maybe they are an executive at a biotech company and so forth. So there's different entryways, but you got to start out really knowing the industry from a science and regulatory point of view if you want to be at the starting gate. Linda, you want to talk about industry?
Sure. There are also a number of ways to get in it. As I said, I started out in clinical medicine and made the change after I had been practicing medicine for a number of years. That is one way that, is fairly common. Those people tend to go into the actual clinical development. So once there is a drug that looks like a good candidate for a particular disease, that's when you start testing it in humans. And oftentimes people with medical degrees tend to gravitate towards that because they're used to dealing with human beings and other physicians. But there's a lot that goes into developing a drug before it gets into humans. First, you have to even identify a lead, a molecule that looks like it should be tested. There's a lot of work that goes into that. Then there's testing in animals, and there's a lot of regulatory interaction with the FDA before it ever gets into humans. So I think, a lot of those people tend to come in with science backgrounds, either, PhDs, masters, and many with just an undergrad, but they went and found a job right after college. There are also people who come at it after business school, who they love science, or they were undergrads in science, and so they want to do something on the business side, but related to science and biotech. So they often will get a job in the business side of a biotech company. There's all, the science drives the company, but it's very important to be able to fund the company and form partnerships with bigger pharmaceutical companies that often help for support the development of a drug. So the business development people within a biotech company often have a business background, but knowledge of science. So there's really no single way to get in. But like Peter said, you need to at least know that you like science and that you want to keep learning about it.
Yeah, that's right. And by the way, if you end up in the R&D side of biotech, very often it's through being a researcher at a university or so forth, and then you embed something where you get hired away and so forth. But that's another path. Or if you're on the side that clinical, the clinical trials, et cetera. There's some degrees in data analytics and bioanalytics that are really helpful because it's very quant intensive, right, Linda, in terms of the kinds of analysis that you have to do in order to say, do you have the right, is it efficacious, do you have the right safety things, and what constitutes an adequate, number of, of patients, et cetera. Peikwen, you on your side, which is your comment on your side?
Yeah, just sort of building upon, the Peter and Linda's comments. I mean, it really, the whole industry of biotech is an ecosystem. And this ecosystem needs huge collaboration between research and development, regulatory, clinical trials, manufacturing, quality, business development, intellectual property. And so to enter the biotech field, you can actually come in from multiple degrees. You can come in from the law side, but with a passion for science and develop IP, which is a critical part of the field. You can learn about transactions and get involved in the business development side. You could have a passion for manufacturing. You could be an engineer. Or interested in working with patients or statistics, et cetera. And so I think there's many different routes to get into it. But I think the key is really, no matter what, because it's such it's a deep field and requires time, is really first start with a passion. And that passion will really sort of carry you through. Now, for someone who is totally not from the industry and sort of entered into the industry, I mean, I've had to learn a lot of things on the fly. And so things, if you're on campus, you can go to the med school and join grand rounds and listen to these talks. And initially, for me, it was like complete foreign language. Didn't understand a thing. But over time, you develop a certain fluency. You're like, okay, I sort of get what they're talking about. And then there's so many different tools that you can then, use to augment your understanding. And so it's not just at the med school, but all the different schools. And so I really think Yale is such a tremendous university. Tap into those resources, and especially these sort of interdisciplinary type programs. Each year, Yale has different pitch fests. In December, in the Yale Innovation Summit that happens in May. Highly encourage, go to these, listen to different pitches, see what problems are people solving. I think a big part of joining this industry is you really have to think about ultimately what problem are you solving? How are you trying to help people? And then work back onto what is the best solution? And then how do you scale that, right? And so it really comes to that sort of need finding, and then really, sort of then an iterative process of, trial and error and figuring things out, and then reworking until you do it. And so I think, that's a key part. And then the other thing is, I think, one can develop their career in different ways. One can be a specialist, one can be a generalist, but it maybe is better to also be sort of a blend of that, someone that's sort of, T-shaped, if you will. So really deep in a certain area, having an area of expertise, but then really having a broad understanding of all the other connected parts, because in the end, you work with teams, right? So you want to be able to connect dots. You want to be able to see what other industries are doing, and then perhaps you may be able to borrow from them or learn or collaborate. And so I think having these, being a dot connector, a builder, and fostering relationships is important.
Yeah, and I think you ought to think of this almost like how you solve a problem. So, and if you know yourself, so for example, you don't have to start out with joining biotech. You could join big pharma and work within big pharma, learn skills and so forth, and be very successful and never leave, right? On the other hand, if you're more entrepreneurial, you might end up saying, okay, at some point, I'm going to join a smaller company or growth company or startup or whatever. So I think you need to know yourself. But I think the key is there are many, many different successful paths in having a career in biotech. And it can be within a biotech, it can be within big pharma, because within big pharma, they practice biotech. It's just within the context of a large company. But I guess a lot of it is separate from self-assessment is do your homework. Pretend like you're analyzing and saying, let me analyze this company or this whatever, and go through the different things, because they could have great science, but if they don't have the right patents, or if the managed team is not very good, it won't succeed. And you want to make sure that you can't figure out everything, but you want to make sure that all the key boxes of success or failure, that at least you have look at the company you're thinking of joining and really walked your way through that. Let me ask this, each profession is different. What I love about the fact that we've done this over 75, different professions, is the next question, you get totally different answers, which is what type of people tend to do well and are happy. And by the way, the one we did on the music profession, shall we say, won't match the biotech, by the way, but by the way, I thought that was going to be a small group. You won't believe how many people showed up to the
Wow.
one on music. It was, I was shocked. But anyway, so, what kind of people tend to do well, whether it's biotech or biotech within pharma or in research? What are the characteristics? If you look at the people that you've seen, because both of you have seen people around you, right? And some have done well, some haven't done well. Can you generalize at least on some of the things you've noticed that were characteristics of the ones that did well?
Well, I would say, as we've been saying, people have to have at least, an interest in science. Although you don't have to be a lab person. And I think a lot of people do go into the lab and find that that's not what is making them happy. And they really want to be more around people all the time. Many of those people end up going on the business side. But I think people who do well are able to work incredibly hard and are able to, I'll say, not need immediate gratification because biotechnology is a long haul.
Linda, you didn't invent drugs every 3 weeks?
Oh, yes, of course. Well, that's an exception. No, like we heard, it can take 10 years to get to the finish line or longer. And you have to be able to enjoy the journey. You have to be able to enjoy the people that you're with, that you're working with, enjoy the intellectual challenge. Peter mentioned how important is money to you. I would say people who do well in biotech are not primarily motivated by money. If that's your main goal, then biotech is not the right field to go into, although you can do incredibly well, and there are plenty of biotech billionaires, but there's no guarantee, and you do have to really be doing it because you love the work, you feel the mission, which is to create something that's going to help people. You really have to have that goal at the heart of it.
Otherwise you shouldn't be in there, because it's actually a pretty hard profession compared to a lot of professions, right?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It's hard work, no doubt about it.
Peikwen, do you have any comment about who does well?
I mean,
Other than people who went to
okay,
Stanford undergraduate and, and
no. If anything, that's not helpful. But but I yeah, completely echo what Linda said. I mean, I think um, I think it's you have to have curiosity, you have to have passion, you have to have something that you really care about, because I have great admiration for the amazing scientists I work with. I mean, they're phenomenal, and they start with some idea that is really just an idea. And then for that to then get to from idea to preclinical studies into humans, it takes a tremendous amount of work and time. And so you have to be able to, one, have patience, because these things unfold. You have to be okay with uncertainty. But I think that's part of the excitement, is that as it unfolds, as you make progress, then you really see the profound impact that it can have on hopefully human health, right? And so, but within biotech, there's different routes. There's therapeutics. There's also devices. I mean, I think it tends to be, biotech is a highly regulated industry, and because of that, because we're dealing with the safety and efficacy of treatments, it's there are things that we have to navigate, whereas some other industries don't. And so one has to be able to learn about those, and then figure out, how to, best position oneself to sort of get through. But I think, in whatever aspect of biotech that you have, I think important is, just fostering those relationships, learning from your colleagues, and then also learning to probably storytell around what you're doing. Because in no matter what capacity, whether or not you're sharing about your science to your colleagues, or you're on the business side and you're presenting about your product or company, that way of trying to connect with your audience is an important skill. And I think there's certain skills that, while we're talking about the deepness that you have to have, you can also develop a suite of skills that are also transferable, that are, can blend, not just in this industry, but in other industries.
Yeah, I think another point too, though, that sort of builds on top of what the two of you said, is what type of company and what stage you're in had different risks, and what they're doing, whether it's device or a drug, or, a cancer drug and so forth, also changes what the risk is. If you want to do a cancer drug, the amount of money you have to invest, the number of patients you have to test, is way, way higher than if it's, say, just a drug delivery device, so forth. And the science, but also regulation is different, right? A lot easier to get just a drug delivery device approved than a new cancer treatment, so forth. So the reason why I mention that is it's very important for you to explicitly think about that, right? And just say, how much risk am I comfortable with, right? If you're comfortable with a lot of risk, then startup and something that's a hard science might be okay. If you're not really a risk, your risk level preference is lower, then you want to choose a company that's farther along, maybe close to commercialization, so forth, so on. So I think you want to match your personal preferences with the nature of the company and its stage and what it's trying to do. I mean, would Linda, you and Peikwen agree with that?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's, a very different experience to start a company or join a company that is just a year or two old, versus, we talk about biotech as kind of one thing, but there's a huge range of sizes of companies, stages of companies, and really a lot of the biotech companies that have been around for a while now are like pharma companies. There's a lot of overlap. One thing I just want to add to the last points that were made, like Peikwen said, you know, to be a scientist and come up with an idea, I mean, I think that is really where it all starts. But I don't want people to think that they have to be, you know, future Nobel laureates to go into this field. I am definitely not. And, you know, if I had been smarter, I would have become a scientist, but I soon learned that I was not as smart as your parents, Peikwen, and I, you know, ended up going into medicine. I loved science, but I did not think I was really the person that would be able to go into a lab and solve these incredible problems. Um, and and yet I still found my way into biotech, where a lot of my role has been to work with these brilliant scientists and help them translate their discoveries into an actual treatment, or even translate it via communication, like you said, to a bunch of investors. And so there's definitely plenty of roles for people who are not future Nobel laureates, and you shouldn't feel like you have to be that to you know, have a good career in biotech.
Well, Linda, I know your background, and so the concept that you would say that you didn't think you were smart enough, I find most frightening.
Right.
It's true.
But
No,
that actually reminds me of my favorite quote from Albert Einstein. Someone he said that the difference between genius and stupidity is genius has its limits. That was a favorite. It was on this plaque with his picture, and we were at a benefit, and we got outbid by a dentist, you know, for that picture of Einstein with that motto at the top. But whenever I meet someone who's kind of a smarty pants, I use that quote but Linda, I find it hard to believe that you thought you weren't smart enough to be a scientist, you know, but I'll leave it at that. Switching over to the investment banking side too, I just want to comment that like the science of biotech, which is very varied and very interesting and so many different kinds of things. I mean, if you can't find biotech science or research interesting, you know, there's something wrong with you, right? Because there's so much variety. But similarly, the investment banking side, because of the nature of biotech and the uncertainties and how you value things, so forth, it's much more creative. You have to be much more creative on how you structure deals and so forth. So, you know, contingent value rights, all things, they're far more complex and interesting aspects of biotech M&A and finance than there are in pretty much any industry. And it's really a reflection of the industry, right? It's, you know, it's not a negative on other industries. It's just a positive about how rich and how complex, you know, the biotech industry, and which makes it fun for me because, you know, you got to go in and there's no vanilla, right? I mean, you can't fit vanilla to each situation. You got to find, you know, the creative thing that really fits, you know, the particular financing problem or the M&A, you know, M&A problem. Um, so you know, what's interesting about both of you is that you changed careers, right? You shifted. Neither one of you stayed in one place and all the way through. Can you comment about that too? Because I think there's some industries that are very rigid. It's very hard to move from company to company or from one function to the other. How easy is it within biotech to not change from company to company, but even like change functionality? Say you start out in research, you say, you know, something, I really want to be in the clinical trial side. Or if you're, you know, how easy is it for you to shift careers, you know, within the industry?
I think it's very doable. I wouldn't necessarily say easy, but to go from research to the business side. And a lot of people do that. It's not so easy to go in the other direction. And I have not seen many people do that. I think if people, you know, are going to work in research, they usually do that, you know, first coming out of school or from another research job. But it is certainly possible to move into another, more business role or regulatory role. You've heard us talk about all the different regulations that biotech and pharmaceutical companies have to deal with. There's a whole function within companies that manage that. Some people, after training in science, go to law school and become patent lawyers. So, but I'd say that the general direction is from doing science to the other kind of ancillary roles that support companies.
Yeah, and that's actually true in a lot of industries that are more invention intensive, right?
Mhm.
So you're not going to be the CEO of Intel if you started out in marketing, right? For example, right?
Yeah.
And in the chemical industry, which is another industry follow, pretty much until 20, 30 years ago, there was no such thing as a CEO of a chemical company that didn't have a PhD in something, in chemical engineering. So I think that's definitely true in biotech. Peikwen?
Yeah, I mean, so, I think, Linda's advice and Peter's advice that starting with a strong technical foundation is certainly a good starting point. I mean, I think I'm no genius. I have big limitations, and I know that, even though I'm sitting there in grand rounds, there's only so much that's coming in through osmosis, right? So if you're able to, pick those up while you're still training at Yale or going to grad school or et cetera, that just gives you a broader skill set foundation that you can build upon. I think when you between shifting industries and shifting roles, I think that there's I think, for me, I've worked in multiple industries. I've worked as a mechanical engineer, as a designer, as a in internet, social media, art, a number of things before I ended up in healthcare. And I think, if anything, it allowed me to develop a unique skill set that helps me be able to bridge things in a different way. And so I think I also encourage you to be flexible of thinking out of the box. So just because you may not be from a particular field, you may bring a point of view that may be really unique and additive. And by pairing together, maybe with someone who is made stronger technically in certain areas, you may be very complementary, right? And that's where ultimately it comes to teams. Working in the size of organization is also important, right? I mean, I think there's value when working in small organizations and large organizations because you can see how different things get done. In large, big pharma companies, which I have not worked in, but I've worked in, other corporations, that you have, strong culture, set ways of doing things, but you tend to be more focused on a particular role, and then you go really deep into it. When you're working in a small company, you wear a lot of hats. And it's probably easier to switch into other roles when you're working in a small company because someone needs to do it, right? And if you raise your hand and you want to do it, there's opportunities to really learn about multiple things at the same time. And so I think there having gone to, I ended up many years out, went back to school. I went to business school overseas, and saw that a lot of my colleagues, their classmates, they used going back to school as an opportunity to also develop a new skill set, challenge whether or not they really liked what they were doing, or explore the potential of trying a different role, or going into a different industry. And so there are those opportunities. And so I think using your sort of network, working within your organization, trying different things. Probably the hardest part is making the decision to do something different. But once you dive in, you're like, you're going to figure it out. You guys are all Yale students, all smart. You're going to figure it out. It will work out in the end. It may be challenging at first, But I think that's part of the, excitement and growth, really.
Yeah. We've got a number of questions and some good ones. So what I'd like to do is turn to some of those in the last 7 or 8 minutes we have. One is interesting, and I think this was triggered by Linda when you were talking about AI becoming an important tool in biotech and drug research. So Ms. or Ms. Anonymous Attendee says, so if a researcher in biotech is not educated in AI and system bio, are they out of luck? Is that what I'm hearing? So I guess could be answered by either one of you.
The answer is no, definitely not. I think what I meant to say is that, AI, systems biology, synthetic biology is, these are all emerging areas that are impacting biotech. But, you need to be, I'd say, conversant in them. And it all depends on what your role is within a company. And, all of these are so new that everybody is learning about them. The science is developing as we speak. So you certainly don't need to have a formal education, credential in those fields to enter the field of biotechnology. But depending on what type of company and what role you have, you'll need to get up to speed, if you're in a role that is very integrated with one of these technologies.
Yeah, and as I've looked at AI across many industries, the good thing is AI is particularly well suited to help accelerate the choice of different molecules, which ones are going to be more effective, so forth. So it's not necessarily the enemy, it might be the friend by taking, instead of, 10,000 candidates, and you have to slug your way through to get down to the 50 that makes sense, to get you the 200 that then you really test. So it actually can be a friend, and actually can make companies more successful. But AI can be an enemy too. I wouldn't want to be a beginning computer programmer, these days, because AI is going to wipe that out. But it doesn't mean sophisticated programmers aren't going to do well, because they're always going to be needed. But I think AI may be less destructive of jobs in biotech and pharma than it is in a lot of other industries, like investment banking, for example. I wouldn't want to be, or a radiologist, for example. I think AI is going to wipe out radiology, right? Because it's very good at reading X-rays, right? So I think it's more positive than than negative. There's an interesting question from Christopher Van Lang, who said, of all the panelists, at COVID, there was a gold rush investing in biotech, but with that, a lot of poorly vetted and questionable companies were started. How do we as a community prevent the Thanios and cassavas from taking root? Actually, that's a good point, but it's even broader than that. I mean, the reality is biotech goes through these huge, crazy upticks and crazy downticks. And there are a lot of people in the industry, whether they're in the industry or venture capitalists, who wish it just stayed, within a certain band, and money was available, throughout the whole band, rather than, feast and famine. And that's a problem with biotech, which is it gets faddish, and people get excited about something, and they get too excited, they bid up the values, they give too much money to people, and then they go the opposite direction. This is true for many, many, many decades. And I wish that we could break this pattern, but it's been very hard. Peikwen and Linda, I don't know whether you agree with what I just said or not, but that's my response to Christopher.
I definitely agree that this was not a new phenomenon with COVID. I remember, back in the late 90s of the last century, there were boom times where all you needed was the name of a Nobel laureate and, a few, petri dishes to start a biotech company. And if it was in a hot area, you'd have money thrown at you. I think if anything, it's a bit better now, because, there are many more sophisticated people who are investing. Most venture firms, are fully staffed by MDs or PhDs or both. And so in general, the level of diligence has really increased, the quality. However, there is still an element of hype and excitability. And like Peter said, investors can be lemmings. And if there's something, I mean, Theranos, when I first started hearing about it, and I was thinking this just doesn't make sense, and people who really understood diagnostics were saying there's no way this is possible, but a lot of less informed investors piled in, and it was really a disgrace. Similar with cassava, and I know that company very well, which really was also a disgrace. They claimed to have a drug in Alzheimer's disease, but so the community isn't perfect, but I do think overall the trajectory has improved over the years.
Yeah, and certainly if you're choosing a company, do your homework, make sure that there's no crazy stuff, but also if there's nothing wrong if they happen to be, in a fad frenzy, if they raise a bunch of money, because then you're going to be financially healthy, but also, be careful of situations where if the company, if the fad goes the other way and the company didn't have a lot of money, you can be in trouble, but sadly, maybe not for the right reasons, right? Peikwen?
Yeah, and I think there for every high profile bad actor, bad story, the majority of people are doing things for good, virtuous reasons and are developing strong science. And so there are the people who have tainted the reputation of the pharma industry, and unfortunately that impacts people who are trying to do good. But I think ultimately it'll come down to, as you personally explore opportunities, is do your own vetting of the science, do your own vetting of the people. While trends can be exciting, that's not necessarily where you need to find your sweet spot, right? I think it's trends change. You don't necessarily, you want to be at the cusp of innovation, but not necessarily a me too or me too better. It depends, right? I think you can build a business as a first in class, as a me too better, etc. There's different, generics. There's all different ways to sort of play it. But I think if you're, really trying to sort of push the envelope, sometimes you will be taking risks that investors may not initially jump at. But as you continue to de-risk and develop the science, more and more people will start to get the story, and then you can really be at the forefront of changing a paradigm. So I think it's this industry is high risk, potentially high reward, but as Linda pointed out, you shouldn't be in it just for the reward, right? It's really it's part of the journey. And hopefully, there's certainly a lot of learnings along the way, and hopefully good things happen. But mostly for human health. Yeah.
There's a question from Freddie Gonzalez, which actually I think, Linda, you would be the perfect person to answer. It says, how do you scrutinize the management team if you're considering being joined? The reason why I thought, Linda, you might start first is because in your role as a venture capitalist, but also when you were being recruited, which happened a couple of times, to be a senior executive at a biotech company. In both cases, part of the exercise was to scrutinize and evaluate the management team, right? So maybe you could help Freddie in answering, his question about, how do you figure out whether the management team is first rate?
That's a great question. Well, obviously you hopefully will have a chance to meet with them and, to as many people on the senior team as possible. Really listen to your gut when you're meeting with them, and sometimes you can pick up on signals that tell you something isn't quite right here. I just don't feel the right chemistry. But then you do your diligence and you start asking people who might know them about them. You find out what kind of reputation they have. You look at their resumes and see what they've accomplished. I mean, it's you really dig in, and everybody, if I'm for example, as an investor scrutinizing a management team, they'll give me their references. The references they give you will almost always be very positive, because otherwise they wouldn't give them to you. So you got to go offline and find some back channel references. I think it's just a combination of those things.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And most people, part of it also is the balance of the team. There's an analogy that a lot of people like to use called the barrel stave analogy, which is, what's the capacity of a barrel? A barrel is made up of staves, and then there's a metal band around it. Well, the capacity is the height of the shortest stave, right? So when you look at a management team, because very few companies can survive because there's only one good guy or two good women, it has to be a complete management team. Because if the financial side fails, it's going to hurt the rest. So part of it is to look and say, what's the shortest stave, right? And your hope is that the shortest stave is high enough so that it's going to be a successful company, right? You're never going to have one where all the staves are at the top. It's never, if you wait for that, you'll never join a company. But you can't have a situation where some of the staves are 12 inches high and some are 1 inch high, right? Then guess what? The water is going to flow out of the barrel. Well, we have still a number of questions. What I'm going to do is I'm going to copy these questions and distribute it to our panelists, and so that if they can address some of them later, we'll find a way to do that. But I want to end and just ask each of the panelists, maybe what's a one sentence takeaway that you might, give to the audience here, that you want them to remember out of all this when they think about their career in biotech?
You will never be bored.
Peikwen?
That's very true. You'll never be bored, and everyone is on their own journey, on their own path, right? And it's a choose your own adventure. So whatever path that each of us on this panel have taken, yours will have its own unique flavor, right? And so be brave, enjoy learning, and know that your career will actually probably take many different go through many different chapters. So just because you start out in one way, that doesn't set you in a trajectory for life, right? You have doors that open and close all along the road, and so enjoy that journey, enjoy the learning, and feel free to reach out to me, and I'm sure you're so blessed to be part of such an amazing alumni community. Unfortunately not a part of the alumni community, but very grateful to be, close to it. And so best to all of you.
Yeah. And my only comment would be this, things are going to happen that you just can't predict. And things that are positives, things are negative. So you got to go in assuming that and just really try to be resilient, right? because things are going to happen and you're going to have to pivot and so forth. And just, keep that in mind. So, and then aspire to have Peikwen's office that looks so beautiful, right? So I want to thank panelists for, sharing their thoughts with the audience. I want to thank the audience for joining, and I hope this helped you a little bit in your career decisions. And this is being recorded, so Peikwen will be able to binge watch and get his parents and all his relatives to watch. But we'll send the link of the video recording to all of you, the people registered and the people who attend, so that if you missed part of it or whatever it may be, that you'll be able to watch. So thank you very much. Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Peikwen. And it's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Peter.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Linda. Thanks, everyone.